There are 100,000 marijuana smokers in the US, and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing, results from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. 1937, and the speaker is Harry Anslinger, formerly a commissioner in America's Bureau of Prohibition. Then from 1930, he was promoted to Chief of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And everything you need to know about the war on drugs is there in those words. Obviously the racism, that root hatred of the other, the fear, disgust of sensuality and enjoyment in these sneers about entertainers, and in this weird misogynistic need for government officials to concern themselves with whom white women are seeking sexual relations. But besides all that, there's this keyword satanic. There's satanic jazz and swing and marijuana usage. The war on drugs is a holy war. It goes way back. It's a holy war against sacraments which aren't Christian and are therefore of the devil. Sacraments which are very different to the Eucharist, where the body of the Lord is a little white wafer, and the blood of the Lord is a grape that's rotted. Marijuana, on the other hand, manifested with music, with jazz, with swing, not music to sit and listen to, but music that makes you move, sounds to take you out of your stillness, ecstasis. And so in response, we see a continuation of thousands of years of authoritarian war against the senses, against the body, against the brain. We see Harry Anslinger, alongside fellow 1930s crypto-fascist William Hearst, who was the Rupert Murdoch of his day. And this lot kick up a bit of a campaign. Reefer madness. Soon, men with letters after their names, PhD, MD, are warning the world that marijuana not infrequently leads to violence. Marijuana makes the smoker vicious, with a desire to fight and kill, and on and on and on. One interesting thing about the anti-drugs crusaders is how very quick and eager they are to lie. Although, consider tobacco. It's really fallen out of favour with governments recently. So we've seen the various smoking bans, restrictions on advertising and packaging. There have been efforts to ensure that everyone knows the dangers of smoking. And all this, I think it's fair to say, constitutes a war on tobacco. Not a war on people who use tobacco. But compare that with psilocybin or magic mushrooms. You can spend up to 7 years in a cage, plus have to pay an unlimited fine for eating a mushroom. Like, it's such a fucked up, awful, dangerous mushroom. Just tell people how fucked up, awful it is. There are mushrooms that can kill you, that can seriously damage you. There are poisonous berries and leaves. We cope. But the thing is, psilocybin isn't actually dangerous. It isn't toxic. You can't overdose on it, nor is it addictive. A recent study suggests that people who use magic mushrooms are less likely than average to be addicted to any substance. There haven't been many clinical studies involving psychedelics, but the Holy Inquisition has allowed a few here and there, so there's one on addiction. Another one claimed to demonstrate a link between magic mushroom use and new psychological understandings and personal insights. I think you can find that online if you know how to quantify it. New psychological understandings and personal insights. In the early 60s, psilocybin was given to prisoners in jail to aid with their rehabilitation. And more recently, it's been trialled with very positive results as treatment for problems ranging from OCD to cluster headaches. There's no indication of any long-term side effects. And we've had plenty of time to find out. The use of magic mushrooms has been traced back to prehistoric times in Europe and North Africa. Well, we know it's been used for centuries at least in Central and South America, because we know that when the conquistadors swarmed over from Europe and spread across the continent, destroying everything and enslaving everyone, they encountered religious ceremonies revolving around the use of magic mushrooms. They banned the ceremonies, they banned the mushrooms. The war on drugs goes way back. There's an early 20th century writer, H.L. Mencken. Have you heard of him? Oh. He was alright, I don't know what H.L. stands for, but Mencken, he was a sort of American journalist, essayist type. Generally, he was pretty cool. He'd go to war with redneck fucks wherever he found them. He could be a bit of a redneck fuck himself. He's one of those people reading him, and suddenly he's going on about like the inferior races. You know, okay, that's a good time, I suppose. One of the things he said, it was something like, even if those inferior races aren't actually inferior, even if the grand theory of racism turned out to be wrong, even then it would make no sense for whites to treat non-whites as equals, because whites have got 50 uninterrupted generations of culture behind them. Whites have got Shakespeare, whites have got Beethoven, whites have got love and marriage go together like horse and carriage. How could Negroes and Hispanics and Filipinos hope to aspire to these cultural heights? One obvious point Mencken's missing there is that in these same 50 uninterrupted generations, those non-white races would themselves have been learning a thing or two. They have their own religions and arts to attempt to preserve and pass on, despite slavery, despite colonialism. And come the 20th century, there's a level of freedom whereby these suppressed cultures can begin to emerge, and you see that happening in all sorts of ways, but perhaps most noticeably, most profoundly in music. Suddenly there's jazz and swing, there's blues, there's gospel, there's all this new music which swallows the shit out of the bland, insipid culture of the time. New music accompanied everywhere by old drugs. I'm talking about America because America really leads the way with all this, but the war on drugs is by no means just an American thing or a white Western thing or a Christian thing. Psychedelic paganism is illegal everywhere. And here in Britain, jazz and cannabis saw the exact same moral panics, these scares that decent people, and generally decent white women, were being corrupted by the heathens hashish, who were dancing nude dances in underground mixed-race dens, while out in the colonies, out in India and in Egypt, diplomats and traders and the sons and daughters of diplomats and traders were sampling the goods, getting the giggles under the strange eyes of strange gods. Something older and weirder and more pelvic than Christ shakes free, gets loose, goes on a rampage, and soon, by way of rock and roll and beat poetry, nothing's the same. The culture is utterly transformed. There's a whole lot of going on, and this is just the start. This is just hash and grass and saxophones, the monkey, the fear, the pleasure principle, right brain games. Laws that were specifically introduced to allow non-whites to be thrown into jails where the conditions of slavery could be recreated were increasingly being used on whites too. The cops were chucking their own kids into prison. But, as Elvis struts and thrusts, strange eyes, strange gods make their next move, and that's those magic mushrooms. In Mexico, in the Cold War 1950s, a holy woman named Maria Sabina made contact with an American banker named Robert Wasson and his Russian paediatrician wife Valentina. Maria Sabina gave the gift of tryptamine molecules embodied in psilocybin mushrooms to the representatives of these two nations that had just figured out how to destroy all life on Earth, and they were looking like, oh, maybe they give it a try. Meanwhile, in North America, in Canada, a psychiatrist named Humphrey Osmond, who will later coin the magic word psychedelic in correspondence with Aldous Huxley, he encounters the ritual use of peyote among local indigenous tribes. Osmond goes on to use this cactus juice in various research projects, including giving it to alcoholics with very positive results, also to fellow psychiatrists, to philosophers. And right around the same time in South America, a biologist named Richard Schultz, he similarly encounters the use of ayahuasca among the tribes that had escaped extermination. Ayahuasca is also known as yahe, but the first name that was given to it by Western researchers was telepathine, because of the amount of weird psychic phenomena that seem to accompany the drinking of this brew. There's something you come across a lot in the literature of psychedelia. I've never actually experienced it myself, but there are loads and loads of reports of like two people or several people on the same drug at the same time, and with their eyes closed they're inhabiting some abstract visionary landscape, and it's the same landscape. They can describe exactly what each other's seeing, and if something changes, something happens, they all see it happen. And that could be deranged, druggy bullshit. But like I said, there are lots of accounts of that. And it would presumably be quite easy to design experiments to test that. And if that's true, then right there you've got a new scientific paradigm, because that doesn't fit in with anything we currently know or think we know about the mind or about chemistry. So this is all happening North and South America in these sort of same 1940s, 1950s time period. And right then as well, another psychedelic channel opens up. This was in Europe, and here the process is completely different. The invention of LSD was alchemy, basically. You've got this Swiss chemist, Albert Hofmann, who synthesises LSD. He tries it, does whatever experiments you do, and it was inert, it did nothing. He put it away. Sometime later, I think it was years later, he had what he later described as a strange presentiment to go back to LSD. So he did, he went back to it, looked at it, again, tested it, got a tiny bit on his fingers, put it away, work day ended, got on his bicycle, went home, and LSD wasn't inert. And that was the world's first ever acid trip. So this is, yes, all through 1940s, 1950s, through to the very early 1960s. The striking thing about that period is just how respectable the use of psychedelics is. Before the law gets involved, before the media starts telling people what to think, it seems like pretty much every bright mind is interested, from scientists to Pentagon war planners, from baseball legends to movie stars. There's the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous and the founder of Time magazine. There's bankers and paediatricians, biologists, novellists, CIA operatives. There's, in England, members of both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, pranksters and poets, and psychologists, including Timothy Leary, who was a psychology professor at Harvard. It was him and his team who gave psilocybin to inmates in prisons. Leary had first sampled Maria Sabina's mushrooms in Mexico in 1960, and had on that trip encountered the 3.5 billion years of DNA's evolution, not as a fact, but as an experience. He'd seen what psychology is made of, he'd seen that this was religion right here. So Leary and his colleagues began expounding a scientific mysticism and empirical transcendence. And after a period of intense, colourful experimentation, they announced their findings, their strategy. Start your own religion. They put out a mass-produced pamphlet called that, Start Your Own Religion. And this was something new and incendiary in that kind of early to mid-60s period. They were saying, take what you want from the past, from other people's systems and traditions, but the route to divinity is the route you make for yourself. So write your own gospels, be your own high priest, turn your house, your flat, turn it into a temple. Why not turn it all into a temple? Leary and his League for Spiritual Discovery preached a theological anarchism, and people were listening. People were rejecting empty hierarchies and proclaiming their own spiritual authority. Anyone could be their own visionary, and there was this explosion of psychedelic arts and styles and sounds and songs and beliefs and festivals. These days, festivals are banal. Any yuppie who wants to let off steam can spend a weekend here and there getting fucked up in a field. But don't underestimate how bewilderingly pagan those first festivals seemed. There wasn't really any precedent for them in Western culture, and it wasn't a few philosophers and psychiatrists with names like Aldous and Humphrey. This was millions of working class and middle class men and women who were living a bright new faith. Fortunately, the world had a hero to protect us from heresy. Richard Nixon. At the height of the Vietnam War, Leary was tagged the most dangerous man in America and busted. Peace and love were criminalised and crushed. Nixon introduced the phrase the war on drugs, and from the start it was more than a metaphor. In a book called Smoke and Mirrors, the author, Dan Barnaby, goes through from 1968, when Nixon became president, through to the Clinton 90s when the book was written, and he just lists for each year what civil liberties were suspended in the need to persecute stoners and trippers, what military forces were redeployed to wage war on those of their own citizens who might be using drugs, what Orwellian new laws were introduced, including something called forfeiture. So again, this is only in America at the moment, but like I say, they're leading the way, we'll see where it goes. In America, right now, the police can literally take the property of anyone suspected of being involved in drugs. They can just seize it. And even if that person is subsequently found not guilty, or if the case never goes to trial even, the police can just keep whatever they've taken. Literally, all a cop has to do is say, I smelt marijuana smoke, and he can just help himself to anything. A journalist called Sarah Stillman, in a 2013 article in New Yorker magazine, an article called Taken, she documents loads and loads of cases of the police just pulling over people's cars, mostly, as it happens, non-white people, and keeping the car. Whatever cash, jewellery they've got, just taking it, having it. The houses of suspected druggies, and in some cases the houses of their parents and even their grandparents, have been seized by the police and sold by the police to raise funds for the police. And again, one defence lawyer working in that area has noted, with real estate forfeitures, it's overwhelmingly African Americans and Hispanics. This practice, this law, forfeiture, it's been criticised, it's been challenged, and the justification that has repeatedly been given for it has been explicitly financial. These are tough times, the financial crisis, austerity. How can a poor, struggling police department hope to survive if not with the funds raised from forfeiture? But in her article, Sarah Stillman gives examples of those funds then being donated by the police to anti-immigration groups, and to churches, and to Christian evangelist programs, including one called The Missionettes, which aims to teach girls to obey everything Jesus commanded.